Welcome to the Wellness Growth Show, where we dive into the strategies, systems, and stories behind building scalable wellness businesses. I'm your host, Scott Schumann, growth partner to wellness and health tech founders who are moving beyond one-to-one delivery and into organizations, employers, and institutions. Each week, I sit down with the people actually doing the work, founders and operators growing mission-driven platforms that create real impact and sustainable revenue. Whether you're pivoting from B2C, landing your first corporate wellness contract, or scaling into institutional partnerships, this show is here to meet you where you are, with honest insights, tactical conversations, and zero fluff. Let's get into it. Today we are sitting down with David Jereb, co-founder with Move About Therapy Services. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here. Great to chat to you.
I love this. Okay. Dave. So can you share your journey in occupational therapy from early days, like when you were in the US and then establishing your clinic in Australia?
Yeah, I might even take a little more liberty and go back to when I was 14. My mum paid me $20 to volunteer at a vacation care that had kids with disabilities and some foster kids. And I just fell in love with it. You know, it just was the job for me. And then my sister was actually an OT. And so I got to find out all about OT. And so when I got a bit older, I went and saw what she did, and that led me into OT. And so I went over to the States on my third year placement at my sister's clinic, or at the place she was working. And that's where I met my wife, who is also an OT. And so it sort of continues on where we have a lot of OTs in our family. But I ended up moving to Chicago. There was some, this is 20 something years ago. There were a lot more PD opportunities in the US than Australia at that time. And so it was a really great learning opportunity. And I worked at this amazing multi-disc clinic called Beth Austin and Associates, and Beth is still one of my mentors. She now has over 50 years experience. She actually just did a session with our team, with a psychologist that we work with, Diane Salinger, and they did a mental health supervision around a case with our team now. So we still are connected right back to the very start of our roots in my first job as an OT. But in this clinic, there was so much support. It was pretty amazing. I didn't realize that none of my colleagues that I went to uni with got any support back home, or very, very little comparatively. But we had weekly supervision, group-based supervision with cases. There were heaps of people happening, lots of PD. It was a really great learning environment, learning opportunity being in the States for the 5 years I was there. And then here's the thing. I came back to Australia and there wasn't a clinic like it at the time. And so we decided to go out on our own, and we set up Move About Therapy Services. And Kath went back to uni to do a bit of study, and I was there all alone in the clinic after having all this support and this giant team. And, it was at that point that, you had to be the expert. I was like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And then I had, one of those sessions, those sessions where nothing goes right. And the harder you try, the worse it gets. You just keep trying and you're just not connected. And the kid was running around, and we have a phrase in pediatrics, you got to follow the child's lead. And I was trying to do that, but I wasn't following his lead. I was following him around at about the distance of a lead. But I was always one step behind because I never got grounded. I never got anchored. And, the room was a mess. I kept trying to put up swings and do different things. And I just remember I got him out safely. And I just sat down at my desk and had this tiny little office. And I remember looking through the doorway at this room that was just a wreck from this session that just went wrong. And I remember looking at this puddle on the floor from the bubble tub cool down. It was water with a bit of soapy liquid. We were meant to have long, deep breaths as we blew these bubbles, but the water went everywhere. And I just was like, what am I doing? Right. So I was like, I can't do this. I want my team back. And I remember just looking at it and just sort of frozen, thinking, I've made an error. I need to go back to this team I had with all this support, and just sitting there frozen. And I remember the aircon kicking in, and it made me go, you've got another client. You've got 2 minutes. You've got to go set up for this client. And I realized that, and my body still didn't move, Scott, was the amazing thing. And I just was like, what am I going to do? And then I saw my Post-it notes. Actually, I got some here. I must say there's only one color of Post-it notes. Don't give me your fluoro colors. It's this pale yellow color is the only type you have. But I grabbed the Post-it notes. I wrote, call Beth, who was my old boss. And it was like the spell was lifted. I was able to get up and go do my session. And I had 2 more sessions. And then midday I fell at my desk, and it was 7 p.m. in Chicago, midday in Sydney, and I called Beth. And she's like, "Hey, Dave, how are you?" I'm like, "Not good, Beth." And I told her about this session, and she calmed me down and she talked me through it. And we started, she really fell into the DIR model, which was a model that we used in our practice. And we looked at development, individual differences, relationships. She talked me through what happened in the session, and I made these realizations. And it was good just to be reconnected with her. And so from then on, I started booking in supervision with her, which now I had to pay for because she wasn't my boss. And then I also got some from an OT in Perth and a speech in Chicago and a psych in New York, because I wanted my super team back, the Justice League of
Yeah.
therapy back, where some people had a rough start without support. I had this magical start, and then it was taken away when I set up my own business. And we've never really looked back. That's been a core philosophy of Move About ever since, is we support the people who support the kids. And that's our families, absolutely. But possibly more importantly, that's our team, because they're the ones supporting the families and also our community. But our team, it's so important that we support them to support the kids so they feel in control, we're able to sustain them, and it pays itself back in spades to be able to do that. But I hope you don't mind me taking a little bit of license in going that full route, because really the most meaningful piece is, for me, was coming back and not having that support and realizing how important that is to be able to get that.
No, it's good you had access to that and that you kept those relationships and, you were able to even have somebody kind of give you that ongoing support and walk you through. It was like, okay, maybe there's a different way, right? And, just trying to prevent chaos. And I'm sure there's times where things just still happen and you do your best, but having that extra support because somebody's experienced it, I'm sure, and they can relate to it. Okay. So talking about like your child-centered approach practice, can you explain what that means and how it impacts the effectiveness of therapy for your children or for the children?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I treat from a relationship based perspective. The DIR model I mentioned before is very relationship based and very child and family centered. So, definitely child centered, also family centered. In that there's Winnicott was a famous psychologist who said there's no such thing as a baby alone, only a baby and mother. But it's a baby and family, and so the family, positive and negative, can really impact that child. So we want to have access to be able to support them. But a child-centered approach is really about thinking about how do we support that child to be successful in the activities they're doing, in the environment they're in. Not how do we get them to do what we want? How do we get them to comply? Because you can do that. We're bigger and stronger and louder than they are, but that doesn't create that internal compass that helps them be great citizens of the world and to be successful in life. We get in this to be able to help kids. But if we can look at that child and we can look at what's happening and then start to ask the questions about why that's happening, we can support them to be successful from the inside out. And the trick is actually, more often than not, particularly with challenging behaviors, changing the child is the slowest route to success. If you can change the activity or the environment, particularly the social environment, we can get a lot more success for that child in what they're trying to do, and also in challenging behaviors, much quicker than if we try and change the child. Change the child, they might be more adaptable over time. And so we do want to help them grow and develop as well. But if we're wanting them to be successful in class, we're wanting them to be successful at home, often it's good for us to engage our frontal lobes and start to think into the future and figure out how we can support them to be successful by setting up the task to be the just right challenge for them and making sure the environment is conducive for them to be successful with the body that they have.
Okay. So you've got a book coming out, right? Challenging the story?
Yeah, it came out. Oh, it came out about a year ago.
Okay, it's been out. Okay, great. And then you go into more depth about understanding how to manage these behaviors.
Yeah, challenging the story. I'm really proud of it. I think it's pretty. It does something that I don't know anything else does. I have used a story of Jenny. She's a first grade teacher, and she's in her third year of teaching, but it's the hardest year yet. She's got all these challenging behaviors in her class, and that's a really common story these days for teachers. We really have seen the value of inclusion, so a lot more kids are in regular mainstream classes, but we're not always giving teachers the training or the support they need to be able to support that variety of kids. So Jenny's struggling, and she meets with her friend Ali for coffee and says, what am I going to do? And Ali says, you don't need a what, you need a who, and introduces her to this mentor, Mrs. Who. And so she has this mentor relationship with Mrs. Who. They meet, they talk about the challenge. She goes away, she implements the strategy they come up with, and they come back and celebrate. So it's written as a story. You could read the whole thing in about, 70, 75 minutes. And it's just an easy read, but you get some really key strategies and understanding about challenging behaviors almost without even reading it. So it's about 70 minutes to read. There's a reflection point at the end of each chapter. So it just makes it really easy to take that information in. Unlike I have so many textbooks here that I've never read past the first chapter. A lot of people tell me they read the book in one sitting, and it is accessible for therapists as well as teachers as parents. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. I don't know if you caught that, but
Got it.
yeah. It's a good way to consume information. Throughout history, we've learnt through story until like 15 minutes ago when we decided if you want to learn, we have to make it boring and spit out facts. And actually our brains are set up to learn through story and meaning. And so that's what I tried to grasp when I was putting that into place for that book, Challenging the Story.
Yeah, because through the story, people can relate to their own experiences. And yeah, okay. So you and I had talked before about the concept of burning in versus burning out. Could you elaborate on that? How it differs? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, burnout is so prevalent. Certainly it came a lot to light during COVID, and we had a lot of healthcare workers burning out during that time, but it's continued. And so there's a lot of talk around burnout, and people sort of fall on work-life balance or compassion fatigue. And so there's all these people try and find the reason for burnout. And it's kind of actually, just to jump back to challenging the story, talking about child behavior, we talk about you've got the behavior, which we want to look at objectively, not subjectively. And then the antecedent is what comes before it. And one thing I say is it's not just antecedent, but antecedents. So sometimes there's not one reason, but multiple reasons. And the reason I'm going back to that is that burnout's the same thing, right? There's not just one reason for burnout. And people are often led to believe, well, it's just about work-life balance, which then it's just about the number of hours you do. And so if I work less, I'm going to be less burnt out, right? And often that backfires because it's more complex than that. You need to feel competent before you can feel confident, and before you can get into that flow where your work is actually energizing. And that takes time. And so we sort of set up new grads to fail, thinking about, well, you should be able to be really successful and it should be easy for you to do it in a 38-hour week. At least you guys have 40 hours over there. We only have 38 hours, which just takes us that little bit longer to learn the ropes. It's not about the number of hours. I hear people say, I don't want to live to work. I want to work to live. And it's like, I don't want to do either. Scott, I want to live 100% of my day. I want to love work when I'm at work. I want to love home when I'm at home. And if I feel like reading something about work on a Saturday, I don't want to feel guilty about that. And,
You love it.
I don't mind skiving off in the middle of the workday and checking Instagram, because I trust that I'll get the work done. I got to get the work done. I don't judge myself for making those choices. So it's not about the number of hours. That's some element. Obviously, you guys in America probably work a little too hard, I think, but it's not just about the number of hours. And it's not just about compassion fatigue, which can be a real thing. So that's where we're down in the emotion of what can be happening with our cases and with our clients. I do think, though, that a big part of it is whether we're in alignment with our vision and values. And this is where burning in comes in. And so I have to give credit to my friend Rhiannon Chris. She's an OT over here, and she coined this term. As soon as I saw her put this on Instagram, I was like, they're the words I've been looking for. I've been teaching people about this for so long, and they're the words I wanted. So I said, can I use those? Did you create those? And she had to Google to see whether she actually made it up or not. But I think she did. And I guess burning in is about focusing on how do we light our passion? How do we stay true to our vision and values? Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he talked about he who has a why can bear almost any how. Is it anyhow or any what? But it's about the why anyway. The why is what lights us up. And I know people who work huge hours, but they're so passionate about what they do that it sustains them. I know people that have cut their hours back and back and back and back, and they're still burning out because work is work, and that's depleting, versus work is my calling, versus I have this vision that I'm living out. I have these values that I'm sustaining, and I'm working from a place of passion. And so I really think that's the secret, is if we can ignite that passion, which if you're talking to health professionals in this podcast, every single one of us got into, like, no one got into health profession because they knew it was a good way to make a quick buck, right? It's a lot of bloody work, our job, no matter whether you're an OT or a speech or a physio or a psych or anyone else. It's hard work what we do, but it feels good because we know we're making an impact and we're really living a life of value. And if you can keep that at the forefront, you can sustain anything else. Now, yeah, by all means, have a run, do your mindfulness coloring in, but it's not just those things. A lot of people say, oh, you just got to go for a run. As soon as they say just, it's like, stop listening to them, because they're saying, you're making me anxious. I just want you to stop. The reality of it is it's complex, and there's a little bit of getting your hours right. There's a little bit about getting efficient at your admin procedures and maybe changing your mindset on them. Another OT who's a friend and colleague of mine, Lisa Tufnell, has just started talking about she's breaking up with admin. And she's starting to think about, I'm going to call it something different that relates to my values. This isn't an admin block. This is a client care block, so that I can, do what I actually was trained to do to help people. And just your ability to jump into that task changes as soon as you change the wordology of it.
Yeah. Okay. I've heard that in terms of like HR or something. It's like, why do we call it human resources when people think of that name? And it's like, why don't we call it, for example, people services? We're here to serve our people. We're here to take care of our people. So it's trying to turn it into something more positive. But yeah, I like that approach. Okay. So you touched earlier on this with like, you were going through the chaos in the beginning and then you reached out to your mentor. And so mentorship seems to play a crucial role in your professional development. So how can therapists find and sort of cultivate effective mentor relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it is really important. And over here, we've got a funding source called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And so that's a government funded scheme that provides funding for people to access services. And it was really helpful for private practice 6 years ago. And then they've set a rate and they haven't changed it. And so we had a shortage of therapists. It made it really hard to find therapists. And then expenses went up with the economy, but the cost of therapists went up considerably. And so there's a lot of business owners doing it tough at the moment. And unfortunately, I'm hearing some things that make me a little sad. So there's people saying, I just can't afford to be giving supervision every week, or I just can't afford to be sending people to professional development. And so then therapists are actually burning out because they don't feel competent and confident at what they're doing. They don't feel supported in their workplaces. And then they're setting up on their own. And that's cool. That's all fine and good. If you've got some years experience and you're competent enough to set up on your own and you're leaving because you're like, well, I wasn't getting supported there, I might as well get every dollar that I'm bringing in. The trick is, for me, if you want to stay true to your values, you don't get to do that and then not get yourself support. You don't get to leave a place because you didn't have support and then just do shitty therapy. I think it's your responsibility to live your values and seek out that support. And so there's a lot of people out there willing to give support. Some people are willing to mentor and not charge or not charge much. I mean, I think we're professional. You set up a bakery, you're going to spend $100,000 to set up your bakery, right? And yet therapists can work out of the back of their car sometime, or a little shop front. And I just feel like they need to be investing in what they do. And the most important thing to invest in is themselves, and make sure you have
100%.
that support. Because, the thing when I told you that story earlier and I called Beth, that's been like at the forefront of what we do at Move About. And that's why we don't lose therapists to other jobs. People move away for family or they go overseas traveling, but we rarely lose someone for the job up the road because they're supported. And we have a rule at Move About. You don't bullshit. You don't have to bullshit a parent. If a parent asks you a question you don't know, you just say, hey, that's a great question. Let me chat to the team and get back to you. Let me chat to my supervisor and get back to you. Or, wow, that's a really big question. Let me have a think about that and get back to you. And families appreciate that, right? Because then they know that you're going to actually go and get them the right information. And so we make sure that's available for our team. But I do think that even if you're out on your own, you should get that for yourself. One, to be able to give the service that you dreamt you were going to give to make an impact, but two, to help you feel good. I talked about how lost I was when I was meant to be the expert and I just knew I wasn't giving the service I wanted to. But it didn't matter because I had support. So I was able to fix it the next week and get things back on track. So getting supports is incredibly crucial. So actually, to feel really good about what you do, I call it, you need this supported self-development. And so it's not just about getting support. It's not just about what you're going to do. It's not just about the business taking care of you. It's a bit more complex than that. And so I sort of group it into three S's: self, support, and structures. Can I chat you through those?
Yeah, please.
So before you even get to supports, the self piece is there. So I talked about vision and values being key. He who has a why can bear any how, what, or whatever it is. But we need to know why we're in it, and that will sustain us. So getting clear in our vision and values and making sure we're not compromising them in the work that we're doing or the workplace we're doing it. Self-care is a big one. And I think a lot of people have talked about self-care. I don't need to get into that. People understand what that means to take care of yourself and get that work-life balance. And self-awareness is the third thing that you need in terms of this self element. So that's knowing, what am I good at? And what am I less good at? What am I really competent and confident in? And what do I need support with? A lot of people are like, I'm no good at this, or I'm not cut out for this, and it's like, well, let's have a look at it and break it down to the elements. And when we start to break it down with our team in terms of the competencies, people that sometimes are in this all or nothing thinking then discover, actually, I'm good at 70% of this. That's pretty cool, but I need help with this 30%. That's quite freeing to get a bit more specific, so it's not this black or white, all or nothing. So self comes down to vision and values, self-care, and self-awareness. Then we need supports, right? At all levels, not we're going to give you support for this first 6 months after you graduate and then you should be fine. Actually, it takes like 3 years to feel competent. And like there are things that challenge me that I need support in. And so that is professional supports. So having a mentor that can stretch you. I think also having people at your level that you can ask questions that you might want to bounce around before you take that to a mentor that you respect is also a really valuable thing. And actually even sharing knowledge, taking on students or mentoring younger therapists. There is that really great piece where, I don't know if you've ever had it, where you take on a student and they ask you a question and you answer it. And then you stop for a second and you're like, hey, did you hear that? Did you hear how smart I was? Did anyone record that? I just said something really smart, and you said something you didn't even know you knew until you were teaching someone. So professional support goes both ways, but I do think having someone that can help answer those questions you struggle with, having peers at your level that you can bounce ideas off, and often that is something that you can form groups from uni or people at your level that you don't have to pay for, but that's super beneficial. And then having people that you can support as well is a great way for you to learn as well as to share that. I think having social connection, I think we're all social beings. Some are more introverted, some more extroverted, but we do need people around us. If not at the workplace, you've got to fill that cup at the right level for yourself outside of work. But ideally, you want to have some part of feeling like you belong within your workplace. So I think social connection is another aspect of supports. And then environment. So there's sensory and physical aspects of the environment that can be supportive or not supportive. As an OT, even though this isn't really my area of OT, you want to have a chair where your feet are flat on the ground or a footrest so that your ankles, knees, and hips are at 90, 90, 90. That's a supportive environment. You want to make sure that things aren't too loud or too busy that you can't focus on the work in front of you. And sometimes you need to be able to have some radical candor with your colleagues to be able to say, I'm working here. Can we keep the noise down?
Shut up
have
the
some
noise.
rules together to be able to do that. So
Okay.
supports comes down to those professional supports, social connection, and that supportive environment. And then the last thing is structures. And that's things like structured reasoning tools, models that you go off, ways that guide your practice so that you don't have to think about everything. You can have a framework to follow while you're learning the ropes. That's really important. And then you just need to learn your skilled observation and get in that strategic practice. You just need to get runs on the board with all of these frameworks. And so structures comes down to that structured reasoning, skilled observation, and strategic practice. So self-supports and structures, it's quite complex, but it's also quite simple. And it's not all about you, and it's not all about the work. They all have to come together to feel authentically confident and not just be faking it till you make it.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, I thank you for this. This has been super helpful, and I'm sure my audience is going to enjoy this. So tell people, how can they find you? How can they reach you?
That is a good question. I should have wrote that down before we came in. But on LinkedIn, I'm Dave Jereb, and so that's a really good place to find me. On Instagram, I'm Dave Jereb _OT. Hopefully you'll have show notes that you can put these in. And you can find MoveAbout at moveabout.com.au. And so we do run courses. So we have a courses tab on there as well. And anyone in Sydney should come along to our workshop in August, which is the perception action approach, which is an approach to motor function and dysfunction and a handling technique. And it's going to be a really powerful course. We're bringing out a speaker, Elaine Becker from the US. So very exciting.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.